to Dr. Rosling. He did a much better job of explaining those things than I would have done. But I want to pause and go back and think about a few critical elements here that'll help us make sense of all this. This is a really great quote from Jacques Cousteau, the conservationalist. And one reason I really like this quote is because it frames up what the environmental perspective for most environmentalists is on this topic. The root cause of this crisis is just this uncontrollable population growth that's occurring. And in many ways, this is 100% and absolutely true. In many other ways, it doesn't matter that it's true because there's nothing you can do about it. So people who think the solution to environmental problems is to reduce population and overpopulation of our planet, it's not going to happen. There's way too much social, political, and cultural context that is driving this. And then there's some really key truths about population dynamics that make it impossible for there to be any manipulation of what the outcomes are going to look like. They talked about population momentum. Dr. Rosling talked about that in the lecture. That is 100% true, I guarantee, and barring any type of meteor hitting the Earth, that is going to be the outcome. There is no stopping it. So while Jacques Cousteau, who's outstanding, and I love this quote, there's some misconceptions that he has about what is true about our world and the environmental solution. So knowing that, we have to have a much more complex and measured approach to the way that we want to study this. So let's get into it. I want to show this graph, which is not a lot of new information, but let's just take a second to break it down piece by piece. This graph was produced by the World Bank, and it shows that 2015 was when the measurement was. So everything in light blue is a projection, and everything in dark blue is stuff that we have known and measured in census data that we pulled in over the years. So what it's showing is, if you look all the way at the left axis, all the way in the corner at the origin of the graph, it starts at the year 1750. Dust off a little bit of your interdisciplinary knowledge and tell me, why does it make sense to start this graph at 1750? What was happening at about the time of 1750 that really matters on our planet? What was around 1750? There's some big key thing, maybe the most important thing that's ever happened in our society, save the agricultural revolution of 10,000 BC. This is the next big one. Yeah.
Well, it's a little bit too early for the Industrial Revolution, but it's kind of like the start of that period.
It's the start of the period of the Industrial Revolution. So it shows you a little bit before, so you can be like, oh, I can imagine I can extrapolate out this way what the graph probably looked like before the Industrial Revolution, and then this is what it looks like after. So that's going to matter a lot, and I just want you to put that in your mind, is because of economic development, that has facilitated a lot of the population dynamics that you see here. So let's break it down a little bit. So this shows we were about 1 billion at the year 1800, and then we were about 2 billion at the year 1900, and then this massive explosion of population growth. Hans Rosling said the world population has doubled in his lifetime. The same will be true in my lifetime, even though he's older than me. Because of this slope of the line, it's continuing at this trajectory for quite some time. Yeah? All right, so the couple other things I want to point out here. So this graph shows the fertility rates. They went up, and then you see that they start to go down, and this is what they're projected to look like way out in the future. In the year 1970, there was a historic book that was paired along very closely with Rachel Carson's. That was a precautionary tale. It was super foreboding. It was called The Population Bomb. And it was written saying, basically what Jacques Cousteau, that our world cannot hold more people than the number at about 6 billion. He said that is the threshold. If we exceed 6 billion people, the earth will just be totally crippled because of the amount of resources required. There will be massive famine. It's absolutely a doomsday tale. But check out the numbers. We passed 6 billion. We're 7 billion strong. And we're looking all the way up here to about 11.2 billion. What accounts for the disparity between those 2 points? So why do you think, if some of the best scientists at the time looked at the data and said, we can only get to 6 billion, why have we been able to exceed that? Andrew?
Just technological advancements that they can't account for yet.
It was technological advancements that you can't account for yet. Yeah, what else?
The sort of hysteria in response to that. So, like, I think that's at least partially due to those cultural changes that we saw yesterday in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
Where people have less children because of that issue.
There are definitely some cultural consequences, some cultural outcomes that were paired with that. The technology thing is really big. That is the big thing. So let's look at this and think about, I want to add a little more context to this. So here's where we're at, and if I take a point right here, and I draw this, you've seen this sort of slope of the line before. In fact, even in environmental science, we have a name for referring to what the curve looks like in about this portion. What is this? What do we call this?
Oh, it's
exponential.
It's an exponential growth, and we call this, it has a certain type of curve. It's an intrinsic growth rate.
But it's the one that levels off.
And what do we call the type of curve? You remember?
S curve.
Eventually, this portion we call what? J curve.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a J curve. It responds to exponential growth, huge change over time, and then we're going to turn it into a logarithmic expression, and it eventually tapers off. So once we add this, so I'm going to turn this into a plus sign so you can see, once we add this part of the graph, what do we call the curve now? It's an S curve.
Log.
And when we've seen this before, why did we get this tapering off at this point? What do we call this line?
Carrying.
So here's the carrying capacity. So they used to say that number was at 6 billion, but then because of technological change, we increased it, and now experts actually say we could probably get human population up to maybe 13, some people even say 15 billion is the carrying capacity.
I was just going to ask, does that mean that it would be, or that it could be potentially higher, and you just answered that?
It could be. So a couple things. This is tapering off not because we're at the carrying capacity, but because of other forces. Understand that. It's very key. Just in terms of understanding it. There's not like a test question on it, but just to get it. It's not because we're at the carrying capacity of planet Earth. It's because of cultural, social, and economic dynamics. That's what's going to cause the tapering off. Because we could actually hold more. So let's go back to the disparity piece. If technology accounts for that, what types of technologies do you think have increased the carrying capacity of Earth? Because the ecological balance with nature probably is 6 billion. So what accounts for the growth? Yeah.
Like genetically modified food products. Less famine.
What else?
Really efficient farming.
Efficient farming?
Yeah.
Man, you guys are so much smarter than my other class. Yeah.
Vaccines.
Vaccines for sure. What else? Anything else?
I was kind of goes with vaccines, but due to like modern medicine, people live longer.
Just medicine,
Seriously,
other
well,
health
you're
services. What
taking
else?
out
Mostly, I think specialization as well.
Specialization. So this refers to like economy specialization. You mean?
Yeah.
In some ways, the
And other
internet,
stuff.
like awareness of the issues.
Sure. I'm going to say information and education. These all count. This piece is key, and you guys were right on it. About 90 or 95% of this increase is due to changes in agriculture. The ability to provide food has been the most transformative technological advancement that's come in the last 50 years. And that is widely underestimated. That's my background, so I have some passion around it, but I feel like it's important to know. Vaccines, medicines, those are rounding errors. Those have barely improved anything. They've helped with certain diseases and certain epidemics, but when we're looking at the globe as a whole, the carrying capacity isn't because of basic human health, it's because of food. Okay? So the same thing, limiting resources Humans are generalist species. We have the ability to move around. We have our way to think ourselves through shelter and clothing that can allow us to survive in environments. Those aren't the limiting factors. It's absolutely food production. All right, let's keep going here. The next thing we're going to look at is this thing called age structure diagrams. And a synonym for that is population pyramids. I'm going to show a little video to kind of break it down a little bit. So you'll hear those two things kind of used interchangeably, and I might use them interchangeably by mistake in this class. I'll try to use age structure diagram more often, but they're going to talk about it as a population pyramid because of the shape. So here's a short video, and I'll pause in a second to help you understand the axes if you can't see it very well.
The pyramid is a traditional way of visualizing and explaining the age structure of a society. If you draw a chart with each age group represented by a bar, and each bar ranged one above the other, youngest at the bottom, oldest at the top, and with sexes separated, you get a simple shape. In 1970, that shape was a pyramid, because
Just so you can see it here, let me just pause for 1 second. So he's explained is this is a bar graph turned on its side. This is the lowest age, this is the oldest age. This is men on this side, this is females on this side. So the total population in this age group is these two bars combined, and it does it usually in 5-year increments. So 0 to 4, all the way up to 75 to 79, and then an 80 plus.
largest segment of the global population was the youngest, 0 to 5 years old, comprising 14% of the total, followed by the next youngest, 6 to 10, with 13%, and so on, in regular increments until, above 85 years old, there were so few people that the shape vanished into a point. The pyramid was characteristic of human populations pretty much since the day organised societies emerged. With lifespan short and mortality high, children were always the most, and old people the least numerous group. A population chart of England in 1700 looks like a pyramid. But now look at the chart of the global population in 2015. It looks more like the dome of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. than something you find along the Nile. Young children are still the largest group, but now make up only 10% of the population, and those above them are almost as big, with 9.5. The angle of the slope changes most markedly only after the age of about 40. In 1970, the youngest had not only been the largest, but also the fastest growing section of the population. But between 1970 and 2015, the population aged 0 to 19 grew by only 42%, whereas the population aged 20 to 39 rose by 128%. This group added almost twice as many people to the overall numbers than the group aged below 20. There are also now over 50 million people above 85, so the dome of 2015 has a spike. In 1970 to 2015, the dominating influence upon the global population was the fertility rate. That's the number of children a woman can expect to bear during her lifetime. It fell dramatically over the period, meaning that the world shifted from having larger to smaller families. But in 2015 to 60, the biggest influence upon the population will be aging. Small families are already the norm. The fall in fertility is slowing down, and now everyone's living longer than their parents, dramatically so in developing countries. So, by 2060, the dome will have come and gone, and now the shape of the population looks more like a column, or perhaps an old-fashioned beehive. It's a little fatter near the bottom, and curves in at the top. But up to the age of about 50, the generations are of almost equal size, and the shape has vertical sides. The size of the Earth's population is still rising, from 7.2 billion in 2015 to 9.5 billion in 2060. But, according to calculations by Emi Suzuki and Wolfgang Fengler of the World Bank, 2/3 of the extra 2.2 billion people will come from the older age groups, those aged 40 to 59 and between 60 and 79, not from the younger. The increase in the last, oldest segment is especially marked. Between 2015 and 2060, the number of 60 to 79-year-olds will double to 850 million. That's more than 4 times the increase in the number of children and teenagers, which will rise by only 200 million, or 8%. The numbers of the oldest people of all, those above 85, will rise at the fastest rate, by 281%, in 2015 to 60, but from a much lower base, so they do not add as many people to the total. For all of history, humans have lived in societies dominated, in numbers at least, by children. By 2060, children will be no more numerous than any other age group. The year 2015 is, roughly, the halfway point in this astounding transformation.
I love the way this ends because it's talking about in 2015 when this data first came out that we were about halfway through this massive shift in the way we understood humans to exist on this planet. So let's look at this and try to make sure that we know how to interpret this a little bit. So there's 4 different graphs, and we already understand what the setup of the graph is, but let me just point out a couple key things here. So as mentioned, when the base is really wide, you're probably going to be able to expect that population momentum is going to occur. And so as the young people, keep in mind, these graphs show you population size by millions, but sometimes you see this by percent. So you don't know that just because it's wide here, how many people that is. This one, it's normalized that you can see Germany, for example, is only about 4 million, and out here we've got 64 million men alone. So this is a much bigger country, right? And this is India in this case. But because of population momentum, where the younger people move into reproductive age, that population is going to contribute. So even if they maintain total replacement fertility of around 2, so that means 2 babies per female, enough to replace the contributing number to the population of the 2 adults, you're going to see an increase in population. So when you see a wide base like this, it usually means a rapid increase in the population. This shows the United States, which is a country that is increasing in population slightly or increasing at a very stable rate. And because of population momentum, maybe these people live a little bit longer as they go up, and they're going to survive, and this will just keep going up. So this one's fairly stable, or slightly growing, or slightly decreasing, but it's a pretty stable population. Here in Germany, you see the reverse effect of what you see in India. There are way fewer children. So population momentum here is going to be less of an effect, because if these replace this, or these same trends continue, the population is actually going to decrease. And then on this side, just because it's important, again, we have to think about all of these in the cultural, political, geopolitical, environmental context that they occur in. In China, if you know anything about the one-child policy in China, it disproportionately favored the birth rates for men, and so there's a distortion in the graph, which is usually one of the reasons why we like to show this. Is you can see if, in this case in Germany, females are out surviving men on the top end of the graph. Here, there are more men being born than women, and so there are all kinds of social and population dynamics. Because we've distorted the sex ratio, it'll distort the population dynamics as well. Yeah.
So have people made the argument that like humans for a while were following a sort of R-selected path almost, that there were a ton of births, but
Not so much R-selected, we were just surviving in the world where what was controlling our population was not a limiting factor, it was other factors. So we were just dying due to other causes, not because we had maxed out our environment, or the resources needed.
Is what happening in Germany kind of like what's happening in South Korea?
And
they have
Japan,
a lot, everyone is really
and
old,
Italy.
basically, because they're not having kids.
And in the United States, actually, if we're just looking at birth rates, so the United States by birth rates is a negative population, but because of immigration, we're still seeing some growth in the country. Yeah.
So I read an article about South Korea and how they're trying to encourage, it's like the opposite of what they're doing in Bangladesh, where they're like, hey, have more kids.
Yes.
It's good. Is it necessarily a bad thing for populations to decrease? I mean, politically it is, but like for the world.
Growth.
Bad is a tough answer, because bad depends on who you're asking the question to.
Yeah, sorry.
Not bad like it's a bad question. It just, the answer differs based on perspective, and so I don't know if I am the right person to ask unless we explored it a little more. Does this make sense though? Age structure diagrams, fabulous. So I just want to show this graph again because I think it's really important, and Dr. Rosling referenced it. So we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but just a little time. This shows over time what's going on with fertility rates, and they've been decreasing all over the world. So this reality, the small family is already a reality. Peak child has already been achieved. Population momentum and survivability is what's going to increase the population on our planet, not intrinsic population growth itself. And so what you see is in the developed countries, it's been a slower drop-off, and it's changed over time, but the same trend is being showed in all types of countries across the world until a projected rate at the end of the century where they'll likely reconverge and be very similar no matter what region in the world that you are found in. Feel good? Here's the last thing to explore for the day in terms of content, and then we'll do a little bit of data tool exploration as well. This is called the demographic transition model. Demographic referring to the population dynamics, transition referring to the economy. So the economy is a big piece, and we're going to look at a lot of the economy stuff in a couple as we continue on this. And the model piece is talking about how we can basically overlay this across any country in the world and project what the outcomes are going to look like. But let's look at the axes because I want to make sure that we account for a few assumptions. So here is birth rates and death rates and total population. The y-axis is just showing rate. And we have 3 different lines that we're keeping track of, and they're all interrelated. So the total population is a function of how many people are being born and how many people are dying. So if we just look at the birth rate and death rates, we should be able to figure out what's going on with total population, right? One number makes it go up, one makes it go down. If one of those is bigger than the other, then it causes a change in the total. Simple math. On the x-axis, they show these different stages, and the stages refer to economic growth, and you'll a lot of times just see that the x-axis is labeled as time. But I want to make sure that you understand this, that this process and the transition that is being discussed doesn't occur just because time passes. It occurs specifically because economy and technology develops over time. If you don't have any changes in economy or technology, then none of this is true. So that's a proxy for talking, the time is a proxy for talking about economy. So here's what we're looking at. Here's population dynamic, here's a pyramid. One quick misconception, you look at that, what do you notice? In the far left, bottom left. What do you notice about the first graph? How's it look? How would you describe the graph? It's super pointed, right? It's very wide at the base and very pointed at the top. But look at this, and this is kind of hard to see from where you're at, but this line right here is for 15 years old. What this is telling you is that most of the babies that are born here die before they make it to reproductive age. So, when we draw the survivorship curve, humans are this type of curve. This is what we expect. But in these countries, we see most of the babies are dying, and their curve maybe looks a little bit more like this. So as we break down the graph, there are a lot of babies being born, but the number of deaths is also very close to that. So this is the explanation like Dr. Rosling gave that said, well, you have 6 babies, but only 2 survive. You're at total replacement fertility. So the total population is stable because the deaths are negating the births. Then a transition occurs. Economic growth and technology come in. So the first thing that we notice is the death rate dramatically starts to plummet. Why?
Because of the technology vaccine.
And what types of technology?
Medicine.
It's medicine. What else? The big one.
Agriculture.
It's food. It's basic health. So as an economy advances, people obviously try to improve the quality of their life. Sanitation improves. Hygiene improves. Access to medicine improves. Access to healthcare improves. Information and education improves. Access to food improves. All of these things increased survivability, which is a nice way of saying the death rate goes down. But because of cultural and social momentum at that time, birth rates remain high. So if death rates go down and birth rates remain stable, total population experiences extreme growth, very rapid. Look at the population diagram. So now we're seeing these people are living up and they're surviving, and we have population momentum, we get huge shifts. The next thing that happens is the death rate continues to go down slightly, but eventually tapers off to where people are surviving fairly well, and birth rates start to go down because people start having the realization, just like we saw in Bangladesh. I don't need to have 6 kids. If all 6 are going to survive, I don't have enough money for 6 kids. I only have enough money for 3 or 2. So they start to change in society, and fertility rates go down. As fertility rates go down, population will start to stabilize, and then you get to these periods of the graph where the economies are fairly stable, and the birth rates and the death rates reconverge. You only have 2 babies, but almost all of them survive, and that makes population stable again. So whenever birth rates and death rates are close together, the population is stable. If death rates are greater than birth rates, population explodes. So we've seen this phenomena unfold across almost every country in the world that has experienced economic growth, which is why we call it a model. Now we're starting to see this phenomena like what we saw where people are putting off having families because of their careers and different things, and that reduces the total fertility rate, and now we're seeing negative population growth. So some of these countries actually start going down because the reverse phenomena starts to become true, where birth rates go down and death rates are also down, but birth rates start to be below the death rate, and population also decreases. Feel good about this? Demographic transition model. Very important stuff. All right, now we're gonna spend, we got only about 7 or so minutes, but I want to expose you really quick to the Gapminder tool set. So the Gapminder Foundation is Hans Rosling's Swedish Institute Foundation. And so I'm going to stop the recording.